7:17 in the morning, June 30th, 1908. Central Siberia, the middle of the emptiest place on the map. A second sun falls out of the sky. People 800 kilometers away watch a column of light slide down toward the forest. Brighter than the real sun, they said. And then, about 8 kilometers above the trees, it detonates. The blast is somewhere between 3 and 15 megatons. Call it 1,000 Hiroshimas. 80 million trees go down in a single breath. A patch of forest bigger than London, flattened in seconds. The shockwave is measured on instruments as it circles the entire planet. Twice. And here's the whole mystery, right up front. When people finally reach the middle of all that destruction, there's no crater, no hole in the ground, no meteorite, not one confirmed fragment of whatever did this has ever been found. Not in 117 years. The biggest explosion in recorded history, and the ground never got hit. This is the static files, and this file is Tunguska. Start with the people closest to it, the Evenki, reindeer herders who had worked that forest for generations. Some were camped maybe 30 kilometers from the blast. Inside the tents, people were thrown into the air. Whole herds of reindeer, gone. Camps flattened. Almost nobody died that morning, and only because almost nobody lived there. This thing went off over one of the emptiest places we've ever mapped. Move it 3 hours in the Earth's rotation, and it goes off over Europe. 65 kilometers south, at a little log trading post called Vanavara, a man named Semyon Semyonov was sitting on his porch. His account survives because scientists wrote it down years later, and it is exactly as plain and terrifying as you'd want. The sky split in two, he said. Fire covered the whole northern horizon. The heat was so intense his shirt felt like it was burning off his back. Then the blast picked him up and threw him off the porch. Hundreds of kilometers out, windows shattered and people were knocked off their feet. Farmers thought it was the end of the world. From where they stood, that was a reasonable read. Here's where it gets bigger than Siberia. In England, 5,000 kilometers away, weather instruments twitch. Barographs record a pressure wave rolling over the country. Then, hours later, they recorded again. The wave had gone all the way around the world and come back. It circled the globe twice before it faded. And then the nights turned bright. For days after the blast, across Europe and Western Russia, the night sky glowed, pale and silvery. In London, you could stand outside at midnight and read a newspaper by it. That detail comes straight from the period press. Nobody could explain it. The best guess today: ice and dust from the object, blown high into the atmosphere, catching sunlight from over the horizon. The sky itself was carrying the debris of whatever had died over Siberia. So the whole planet rang like a bell. And here's the punchline. Nobody went to look. Not that year. Not that decade. 1908 Russia had a collapsing empire and a revolution warming up. Nobody was funding a science trip to a swamp at the edge of the world because some herders saw fire. The biggest explosion in recorded history sat there, unexamined, for 19 years. The man who finally went was Leonid Kulik, a Soviet mineralogist with a very simple motivation. Meteorites meant iron, and the young USSR wanted iron. In 1927, chasing 2-decade-old witness reports, he led a small expedition into the Tunguska taiga. Swamps, mosquitoes, pack horses, weeks of it. And then he crested a ridge and saw it. Millions of trees, dead for 20 years, gray as bone, and all of them lying down, all pointing the same way. He walked for days through a forest that had been combed flat, and the trunks just kept pointing him inward, like arrows. Like the whole landscape was a diagram of the explosion, and he was walking it to the center. At the center, he found the thing that still gives this case its teeth. The trees at ground zero were still standing, upright, dead, stripped of every branch, a forest of bare poles. Directly under the blast, the shock wave came straight down. It snapped the branches but not the trunks, which told Kulik the explosion happened in the air. And it told him the thing he never accepted. If it blew up in the air, there might be nothing to dig up. He didn't want to hear that. He'd come for a meteorite, so he searched. He drained bogs. He dug. He came back, expedition after expedition, years of his life, hunting for the iron that had to be there. He found nothing. Kulik died in 1942. A prisoner of the Second World War, still believing the meteorite was out there in the swamp. It wasn't. It was never anywhere. So, 100 megaton bang, no crater, no fragments, no answer. Nature hates a vacuum, and so does a mystery. Into that gap, the 20th century poured every idea it had. Some are fun. Some are physics. One is probably true. Weakest to strongest. You know how this works. Theory. It was a ship. This one has a birthday. 1946. 1 year after Hiroshima. A Soviet science fiction writer named Alexander Kazantsev published a short story where Tunguska is a nuclear alien craft exploding in the air. It was fiction, openly, but the image was so good it escaped the book, and 70 years of documentaries have been living off it since. There's no evidence. There was never evidence. It's a great story wearing a lab coat. Same shelf. Nikola Tesla did it. A death ray test from his tower gone wrong. The dates roughly line up, and that's the entire case. Documented as a claim, not an event, filed under folklore. Theory, exotic physics, and credit where it's due, these came from real scientists in real journals. 1965, 3 physicists propose in Nature that Tunguska was a chunk of antimatter annihilating in the atmosphere. 1973, 2 more propose, also in Nature, a microscopic black hole punching through the Earth. Both papers are real. Both were killed by the evidence. But I love that they exist, because it tells you how desperate serious people were. The data was so strange that antimatter felt worth checking. Theory, a comet. Now we're being serious. A comet is mostly ice. Ice hits the atmosphere at cosmic speed, flashes to vapor, explodes, and leaves nothing on the ground. No crater, no fragments. It elegantly explains the nothing, and for decades, it was the front-runner. It even offers a suspect. A meteor stream the Earth was passing through that exact week. One problem: the physics of the blast. How deep it got before it went off. Fits something denser than a snowball. Which brings us to the last door. Here's the accepted answer. The one the textbooks print. A stony asteroid, maybe 50 to 60 meters across, hits the top of the atmosphere at 50 times the speed of sound. Air can't get out of the way that fast. It piles up in front of the rock like a solid wall, crushing it, heating it, tearing it apart. Until 5 to 10 kilometers up, the whole thing lets go at once. Not an impact, an airburst. A stone that never reaches the ground, turning itself into pure blast and heat in midair. It explains the flattened forest, the standing trees at the center, the missing crater. And in 2013, the universe ran the experiment again. Small scale. A 20-meter rock airburst over Chelyabinsk, Russia, on 1,000 dash cams. Bright as the sun, a shockwave that blew in windows across the city and injured about 1,500 people. Same physics, same signature. Chelyabinsk was Tunguska's little cousin, caught on camera. Case closed, right? Except, say it with me, not one confirmed fragment. A 50-meter stony asteroid is millions of tons of rock. Vaporizing most of it is easy physics. All of it? Researchers have combed that ground for a century. The bogs, the peat, the tree resin. A lake one team argued was a buried impact scar until the sediment said the lake was older than the blast. Microscopic candidate particles, sure. A piece you can hold and test and confirm. Never. The accepted answer works, and it has never once produced a body. The forest grew back. It took most of a century. You can stand at ground zero today, a protected reserve now, green and quiet. New trees over the bones of the old ones. And in the middle, some of the bare poles are still standing. A dead man's circle, over 100 years old, marking the spot where the sky came down and the ground was never touched. Astronomers figure something Tunguska-sized comes down every few centuries. Last time it picked the one morning in the one empty forest where it could go off and kill almost no one. That's the whole file. The sky exploded. It kept the evidence. And 117 years later, we're still holding an answer that fits everything and can't produce a single piece of proof. Some cases stay open because nobody solved them. This one stays open because the solution refuses to leave a fingerprint. Real cases, no endings. This has been the Static Files, and if you want the next file, it's already waiting. Follow, and I'll see you inside.